Welcome back to the Midnight Mirage. We're in the Masjid of Higher Learning. Of course, it's Blackbeard. It's a good Saturday evening, and this lessons tape, we will continue some of the subjects and topics that we talked about in the previous tape when we dealt with the ethnic cleansing of Europa, Asia Minor, the Levant, East Africa, so-called the Middle East. We're going to look deeper into that, get some more images. In the tape yesterday, I also wanted to show the picture Mundi Calcol a little again and go deeper into that. Mundi being a river that's in the Iberian Peninsula, modern day so-called Spain, and Calcol being one of the descendants of Judah who had a son, and after his son did some work with an Egyptian king, they left from Egypt and they settled into modern day what we call Iberia or southern Europa. And from southern Europa, a lot of these melanated Judean families, they spread out into central and northern parts of Europa. All right. So we'll just go deeper into how a lot of the kings of Scotland, Britain, Ireland, and some of the other places in northern Europe, how they were the descendants of the Judean kings of the Old Testament. All right. We'll look deeper into the wild man of Europa. And as I said, the wild man of Asia Minor, because there is a particular phenomenon, a psychological phenomenon called xenophobia. And basically this is when people have a different phenotype or a different image or appearance. Sometimes this can cause insecurities and it can make people feel a little unwelcome. And although we know that every species is supposed to look out for its own kind. So in the jungles of, let's say, the Amazon, the mother anaconda, she, gets her food and nourishment so she could basically heat and bring her eggs to life. The jaguar kills and eats for the jaguar and its babies. The alligators and the various other creatures, whether it's a frog, whatever, they all basically are working to help their own species survive. And although you'll have certain, phenomenon where you'll see like I know in Africa, for example, they have certain animals, like maybe like a water buffalo or hippopotamus, and you'll have little birds and other animals come and they'll eat the insects off of them and things of that nature. So we do have where different species look out for each other in that regard. But overall, in general, most species are going to look out for themselves. And it's the same when it comes to the human kingdom. Except in the human world, human kingdom rather, our species is broken down into our ethnic national groups. So, or really more so the ethnicity, because we may share nationalities and live in certain geographical locations as people of various phenotypes. But as far as the ethnic background, as far as the seed line, the paternal and maternal genetics that, bring a particular group of people on the planet, that is something very, very particular. So we'll look deeper into how when the wild man and the wild woman came out of their isolation, that not only did they destroy and bombard, infiltrate, and take on a lot of the cultures and civilizations that they came across in Europa, East Africa, and the so-called Middle East, but they were very, very harsh. And we'll say today we call it things like racism and discrimination. But basically what it was is they were looking to help their own people survive. So we'll look into, how the wild man, more in particular in the Levant, in the Asia Minor region, how he may practice, how Islam is practiced in the so-called Middle East and in Northwest Africa. But even in the Islamic world, there is a split when it comes to the various ethnic images and appearances. And I know I got a few brothers, salute to them. They know who they are, that have done traveling, and they may have lived in various places in Europa, may have visited certain places in Northwest Africa and the so-called Middle East. And these brothers, may practice Islam and walk the straight path. But because they are melanated indigenous men of more than likely Moorish Shemitic descent, and you can look at them and tell they probably, witnessed some type of discrimination and experienced that. Now, although I can say personally, I've met two descendants of, we'll say, pale Afghanistan and pale Syrian men, and they practiced Islam, but they had a very good, peaceful spirit about them. They never showed me any kind of hatred. Every time I would meet up with them, we would talk about Islam a lot, Hebraic culture a lot, and I never really experienced any negativity from them. But a lot of us, especially here in North America, when we come into a lot of our Moorish and Hebraic culture, and we see that there are other people in the world currently practicing Judaism and practicing Islam, and we may want to fellowship with those people, and we may want to include them in our resurrection of understanding who we are. But these modern day, quote unquote, Muslims and Jews, quote unquote, they really don't see themselves as the same as us, because they know that they're not the same. They know that they are practicing a culture and a way of life that we left behind. And they know that right now we are in more of a dead state as far as understanding who we are. Now, behind closed doors, do a lot of these learned, quote unquote, Jewish people and quote unquote Muslims of the pale world, do they know that we really are the people of the book? Of course they do, but they don't have to act like that. That's not their responsibility. And that's something else as melanated indigenous people that we got to understand too. It's not these non-Moorish people's job to tell us that we are the people of the book, to tell us, our history. It's not their job. We're supposed to be doing this for our own people, So, yeah, they're going to look at you funny when you come in their synagogue and they simple and you try to, maybe worship and pray with them. Yeah, they're going to look at you funny when you come in the mosque or the masjid and you try to, perform salat with them. Some of them won't look at you funny, but some of them will. I can remember one time where me and a Moorish brother, we were walking down Venice Beach in California, and both of us had on, our head coverings, of course, and, beards full. And I remember we walked past this it was like a store. They were selling a bunch of like Egyptian figurines and a lot of, Egyptian type of items. But it was two, quote unquote, Bedouin Arab guys in there. They were pale Bedouin Arab guys, more than likely practiced traditional Islam. And when we walked past, they saw us with our head garbs on, and, and I saw them kind of snickering and whispering to each other and stuff like that. So it was not this welcoming, warming energy of, they seeing us both as, brothers of Islam and, coming both from the Shemitic family. That's not what it was. Believe it or not, after those guys laughed at us and made their little comments and smirks, I really walked past them and walked up in their store, mugged them for a little while and just let them know that, I'm here to check y'all's temperature. And I know who you all are, and I know you all know who we are. And I ain't even buy nothing, of course, but I just walked in there just to, really just to hold my nuts and just be on my emperor shit for a minute. But after that, we left the store and continued down Venice Beach. And I saw a homeless melanated man who was of a very, very dark hue. And he was homeless. But when he saw us in our, Moorish garbs, it's like his spirit lit up, and he stood up and he just started smiling. And he walked up to us, and, he wanted to say a few words, and we exchanged a few words with the brother. And he was just very, very thankful. And I remember he was just like glad to see us looking like that, and glad to see us standing tall, to see two young melanated brothers, who in shape. They both athletic, got a little bit of money in our pocket, probably won a whole bunch. But we was in our higher self, and we were looking nice. We were smiling. We had that glow about us. The An-Nur was very, very bright and strong on us, and he saw that. So, you got to understand that at the end of the day, yes, I know we all may come from the human family and we have different images and phenotypes, but learning this knowledge and stuff like that, man, you really want to try to help the people out from your own ethnic national group. And once I guess you do that, you move forward. And also, let me say this too, anybody that may be non-indigenous or a non-melanated person that may listen to my tapes, you're welcome to do that. I don't practice any type of like discrimination or hatred or anything like that myself. My parents didn't raise me like that, and that's just not the energy that I harbor. But, as I said before, every species will look out for itself. The lion doesn't kill for the hyena. So, you all just keep that in mind. But we got a few sources we're going to read from. And this will be a good take. So the first book we're going to start from is one that I read yesterday, and it will help us answer some questions. But as we know, today is Saturday, and in the Shemitic world, we have an issue right now on the Sabbath day either being Saturday or Sunday. The Sabbath day ultimately being the day of rest, and you just stay away from certain strict or more harsh, laborious term, basically hard work on that day. Excuse me. Just staying away from a lot of hard work and trying to relax a little bit. When the Catholic Christians, created their culture, they wanted the Sabbath day to be Sunday, but the Shemitic cultures and kingdoms of Europa, they set the Sabbath day to be Saturday. So let's read a little bit about that when King James had an issue with the Catholic Church when they were trying to change the day of when sporting events took place. Let's read. Now, first, we're going to just go into how King James VI of Scotland, not only was he not a papist, but he also wasn't a Catholic. So although today we may look at, let's say, people in the medieval period, and we see them dressing a certain way, and we may call them a quote unquote Christian. But at that time period, they may not have called themselves that. When we read into the quote unquote scriptures or the Bible, and we read in the Old Testament, and we may see the prophet Elijah or the prophet Samuel taking care of business, and we may think that those men were practicing quote unquote Judaism. But if you were to ask them at that day, they would have not told you that they were practicing a religion called Judaism. They more than likely were just living out the history of being themselves. So just keep that in mind. So let's look into some information and some letters that King James wrote. Quote, "Would ye know the doctrine of life and death of our Savior Christ? Read the evangelist. Would ye be more particularly trained up in his school? Meditate upon the epistles of the apostles. And would ye be acquainted with the practices of that doctrine in the persons of the primitive church? Cast up the apostles' Acts." Quote, "And as to the apocryphal books, I omit them because I am no papist, as I said before." End quote. From the mouth of a sleeping king, we have this report that he was not a Catholic, but it gets much deeper. All right, let's move forward. All right, so right here is a part where the Romanist Vatican response to King James's comments, whereas King James said he is not a Catholic, neither is he a Christian. All right, so this is his own quote. Quote, "King James is no Catholic, neither is he a Christian." End quote. King James responded by saying he was saved without the aid of Rome and a Catholic in the true historic sense of the word. King James' response to the Catholics, quote, "Not only having ever been brought up in that religion which I presently profess, and so cannot be properly a heretic by their own doctrine, since I was never of their church." End quote. So right here, King James is just professing that his understanding into the Shemitic Israelite culture, the statutes and the commandments and the scriptures, he didn't come into that knowledge by way of the Catholic Church and by any of their extensions. All right, let's move forward. Let's take a mental break from all of this reading and reason together. The Bible has a quote that says, quote, "To whom you yield your members, to the same you are a servant to." End quote. All of the Christian churches practice the Catholic doctrine, and they aren't aware of it. You don't believe me, do you? Let's look at a few things that they do in the Catholic Church and compare them to the customs in your church. The Catholic Church believes in a Sunday Sabbath. So do 99% of the churches worldwide. Don't the so-called black people go to church on Sunday? The Catholic Church teaches a holy day called Easter. The Sunday churches recognize Easter, but the original name of Easter was Ishtar. Ishtar, or Easter, was the Babylonian goddess of fertility. This is the reason that the bunny rabbit and eggs are its symbol. The Catholic Church uses the Christmas tree as a symbol of Jesus' birth. In the book of Jeremiah, it is written, verse 1, "Hear you the words of the Lord, thus says the Lord." Verse 2, "Learn not the ways of the heathen, and be not dismayed at the signs of heaven, for the heathen are dismayed at them." Verse 3, "The customs of the people are vain. For one cutteth down a tree from the forest, the work of the hands of the workmen with the axe." Verse 4, "They deck it with silver and with gold." He's talking about a tree right here. "They fasten it with nails and with hammers, that it move not. They are upright as the palm tree. The stock is a doctrine of vanity. Learn not the ways of the heathen." So let's reread this one more time, because what we're getting right here in the book of Jeremiah is the Babylonian custom and ritual of putting up a pine tree and decking it with ornaments. And today we, have a quote unquote holiday called Christmas, where people take a pine tree and deck it with ornaments. So just like in the ancient world, the Shemitic Israelites were practicing this, I guess you could say, form of idolatry. They still are practicing it today, or at least their descendants are. Let's reread this one more time, because I also want you to understand that the reason why the Catholic Christian Church wanted to include the use of forest trees is because of their history and their ethnic lineage that stemmed back to their time as the wild men and the wild women of the woods, the forests, and the caves of Asia Minor, the Levant, and so-called Europa. Let's reread this one more time. It says, "Learn not the ways of the heathen, and be not dismayed at the signs of heaven, for the heathen are dismayed at them. The customs of the people are vain. For one cutteth down a tree from the forest, the work of the hands of the workmen with the axe. They deck it with silver and with gold. They fasten it with nails and with hammers, that it move not. The stock is a doctrine of vanity." Let's move forward. It says, "I have a question. Do you attend a church that has this custom? If you have land and pine trees on your property, you can see this vividly. You probably have been going out on the property, chopping down a tree and bringing it in every Christmas. If you happen to live in a city, they bring the forest to you. They simply find an abandoned lot and fill it up with pine trees. No matter what route you take, you go out and you get a tree, deck it with silver and gold. You place a star at the top of the tree. Read Acts chapter 7, verse 43. And the star of Remphan. And Stephen called it the star of your God, Remphan. I am only trying to show you that the doctrine of the Catholic Church is in your church. The Catholic Church has statues and images of Jesus all over their churches. But the Bible explicitly states in Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 8, thou shalt not make any graven image of or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water beneath them. This is a custom of the Catholic Church. What about you, old man? Is this the custom of your church? So what this author is doing right here is just showing you that the Catholic Church continued a lot of these ancient Babylonian customs, because the original people that started the Catholic Church were melanated. So it was a mixture of melanated people and amalgamated people, meaning quote unquote mulatto people, who started what we know of as the Latin Catholic Church. And they are the ones who infused a lot of this Babylonian culture in it. All right. I've talked about in previous takes about the Sabbatean movement and the Frankist movement, and how these people, who were a lot of them originally quote unquote Jewish, but when they started to get a lot of, hail and heat for the type of Kabbalistic practices they had, they converted into Catholicism. All right. So once they converted into Catholicism, they just kept up these same satanic Kabbalistic practices Babylonian practices, and they put them out for the people to do as well. So understand that once the Catholic Church did this, of course you had the Protestant Reformation, but even a lot of the Protestant Reformation and all the different denominations and branches of so-called Christianity, Western Christianity, that broke off of them, they all still had Catholic type Babylonian customs in it, such as having the Sabbath on Sunday, practicing Christmas and Easter. All right. So this is just, showing you that there was a difference between King James and what he intended for the culture to represent versus what the Catholic Church, what they wanted to represent. Let's move forward. As I read once before, the Catholics were trying to change the Sabbath day from Saturday to Sunday, so they began to forbid the people from playing sports and working on Sunday. The people petitioned King James concerning sports on Sunday, if they were biblically forbidden to play or not. King James VI of Scotland and his son, Charles I, passed laws legalizing sports on Sunday. So that means that they were acknowledging the Sabbath as Saturday. And basically, you're going to have some letters that were put out by King James VI and Charles II, basically, letting the people know that the true day of Sabbath is Saturday. So you can, do what you want on Sunday. And of course, this, caused a lot of issues between him and the Catholic Church. All right. So now we're going to get ready to go to our next topic. We're going to switch gears and turn pages. Okay. So a lot of information was recorded by, a variety of, we'll say, pale European scholars. And there was one by the name of Professor Winchell Alexander. All right. And he lived from 1815 to 1900. He had a document that he wrote called Our Remote History. And this is what he wrote in there, quote, "These short black men, or pygmies, came from Atlantis, northern Africa, and they overran Europe. They were known as the Britons." I'm going to read that one more time. Quote, "These short black men, or pygmies, came from Atlantis, northern Africa, and they overran Europe. They were known as the Britons." So what he's saying right here is that the original indigenous so-called Europeans came from Atlantis or America, Northwest Africa, or in the South. Okay. Now, in a minute, we're going to see how the sons of Judah traveled into southern so-called Europa or the Mediterranean. All right. So now let's transition, and we're going to go into chapter 2 in this same book called Zara and Calcol in Europe. Now we're going to go deeper into also this red lion image that you see in front of you, because this red lion image is very, very deep when it comes to Moorish culture. All right. Understanding that the red lion is the symbol of Judah. All right. And also that name Rothschild or Red Shield has to deal with the sons of Judah and Shemitic Moorish culture and nobility. All right, let's read. "If the kings of Scotland, Ireland, and Britain are truly descendants of Judah, how did they arrive in Europe? This is a question that must be answered to validate the Hebrew claims of the Scottish kings. In order to solve this riddle, we have to follow the footsteps of Judah's two grandsons, Calcol and Zara, from First Chronicles chapter 2, verses 1 through 6. According to the ancient historian Josephus, Calcol left Egypt and founded the city of Athens, but had to return to Egypt after killing a man. After assisting one of the pharaohs in his fight against the Ethiopians, Gathelus, son of Calcol, was given the hand of the pharaoh's daughter Scotia in marriage. After living 7 years in Egypt, Gathelus fled the land at the outset of the plagues and traveled westward to Spain. All right, so let's go through this. So at the top it says, if the kings of Scotland, Ireland, and Britain are truly the descendants of Judah, how did they arrive in Europe? So that means that how did these Moorish kings of Scotland, Ireland, and Europe, where did they come from? How did they arrive there? Because if they're claiming to be of Shemitic Israelite stock, that means that historically and biblically, there has to be some type of a record showing that they had an ancestor that came from a land that either the Israelites were dwelling in, or maybe it was the previous Israelite kingdom. But nevertheless, there has to be some type of a track and record of this. And when we looked into that picture of Prince Charles, let's see real quick. So that pillow right here that we're looking at, that has the word Mundi Calcol written on it. All right. This was actually a pillow on an effigy of Prince Charles I. So Prince Charles I left a record that was going to show the viewer some type of information to let you know where his lineage came from. And it's Mundi Calcol. So let's look deeper. All right. It says that Judah's two grandsons, Calcol and Zara, were the lineage that the Moorish Scottish Israelite kings were claiming. All right. Now, we all know Judah. Judah is one of the 12 sons of Israel, or Jacob. And we know that Jacob and his sons went into Egypt when Joseph was made the bey, or the governor of Egypt. And they dwelt there for some time. So you had a large population of Shemitic Israelite people who were living in Egypt under the rule of Joseph, and a little bit, even after Joseph died. And even before the plague of the Egyptians started, you had certain Shemitic Israelites leaving and traveling west. So before the plague started, the plagues of Moses, some of the Shemitic Israelite people already had left. So everybody didn't leave with Moses. A lot of the people left prior to that. And some of the sons of Judah, some of his grandsons rather, traveled into the west, what we know of today as Spain. This can be found in 1 Chronicles in the Bible. It says, according to Josephus, an ancient historian, Calcol, who was one of Judah's grandsons, left Egypt and founded the city of Athens. So we think of the city of Athens, and we think about those various quote unquote Grecian peoples. A lot of them were of Shemitic Israelite stock. Let me repeat that one more time. When we think of like Athens and Sparta, all right, a lot of those people were of Shemitic Israelite stock. All right. Now, did some of those people may have forgotten their ancient culture and they got into certain idolatry? Yeah, they did, but that still didn't change who they were. All right. So let's go forward. It says Calcol left Egypt and founded the city of Athens, but had to return to Egypt after killing a man. After assisting the Egyptian king in his fight against the Ethiopians, Gathelus, the son of Calcol, so this is the great-grandson of Judah, the great-great-grandson of Israel, was given the hand of the Pharaoh's daughter, or the Egyptian king's daughter, Scotia, in marriage. So that means right here it says there was a fight between the Egyptians and the Ethiopians. And because this Shemitic Israelite man named Gathelus fought in that war and helped the Egyptian king gave his daughter to Gathelus in marriage, and her name was Scotia. So you have a Shemitic man marrying a Hamitic woman. So the lineage of the Scots, the Brits, the Irish in Northern Europa, they came from this lineage of a Shemitic man and a Hamitic woman, both melanated people. So the term Scotland or Scotia comes from this Egyptian king's daughter. All right. It says, after living 7 years in Egypt, Gathelus fled the land at the outset of the plagues and traveled westward to Spain or Iberia. So the original Iberians are the Hebrews. All right. And a lot of them had had an ancestor by the name of Gathelus, and that is where they, sprung forth from. Let's move forward. This is the reason why the effigy of Charles I, which is what you're looking at in front of you, and the wording Mundi Calcol is extremely significant. During their time in Spain or Iberia, Gathelus and his people founded a city which still bears the name of their ancestor Zara, Zaragoza. Wherever they traveled, they left this name like a footprint, marking their journey to distant lands. Thus, the river on the banks of which they founded the city of Zaragoza is still to this day called the Ebro, and to the land itself they gave the name Iberia, the land of the Hybri or Hebrews. After residing for some time in Spain or Iberia, Gathelus died, and his widow Scotia, along with her sons, left the land and voyaged northward to Ireland. Once again, they took their name with them, calling their new home Hiberland or Hibernia, and the islands to the north of it, the Hebrides or Hebrews. So what we have, we're gonna go through this. So as I said, Mundi Calcol. Mundi is a river in so-called Spain or Iberia. And it said that Gathelus, which is the great-grandson of Israel or Jacob, founded a city named Zaragoza. But after Gathelus died, his wife, Scotia, along with her sons, left Iberia and traveled north. So they left from the area that we call Spain and traveled north into what we call the modern, quote-unquote, British Isles. And they created what's known as the Inner Hebrides and basically the Outer Hebrides, Northern Ireland, all right, the British Isles. So we think about Scotland, Ireland, and Britain. This is the area that Scotia and her sons went. Remember, she's the wife of Gathelus, the Shemitic Israelite. So the Shemitic Israelite lineage is coming through the father, Gathelus, all right? And the sons of Scotia continue the lineage. So this is where the royalty comes from. All right. Now I want to go to our other picture, because this is right here showing us the Moorish Shemitic royalty. Then it says, then with Ahriman as their king, these descendants of Zara, Judah, founded the kingdom of Ulster shortly after the Exodus. From that time until now, the emblem of Ulster has been a red hand circled with a red scarlet cord. If you have time, read Joshua 2, chapter 2, verses 17 through 21, and you will see that Zara's son gave the harlot Rahab a scarlet thread to place over her home as a sign of protection. This is how I knew that the spies that entered Jericho were the sons of Zara, the scarlet thread. So let's reread this, because that color scarlet red and that royal red color that you see on the Moorish flag, that royal red is coming from the descendants of Judah, all right, the Israelite line. That's where the kingship is established through. Let's reread this. It says, with Ahriman as their king, remember they moved from Iberia or Spain and moved into the British Isles, what we call England, Ireland, Scotland, that area. It says, with Ahriman as their king, these descendants of Zara, Judah, or Israel, founded the kingdom of Ulster shortly after the Exodus. From that time until now, the emblem of Ulster has been a red hand circled with a scarlet cord. If you have time, read Joshua chapter 2, verse 17 through 21, and you will see that Zara's sons gave the harlot Rahab a scarlet thread to place over her home as a sign of protection. This is how I knew that the spies that entered Jericho were the sons of Zara, the scarlet thread. So think about how when Joshua and the various Shemitic Israelite men sent some spies into Canaan, and they were staking out the land, and they noticed that the men were giants. They had, producing large fruits and things of that nature. But outside of their cities, you had people that were living out in camps outside of the cities. And long story short, the Shemitic Israelite men, they came across a woman and her family, and they basically told her, look, we about to take this city, so you all need to get out of here and protect you all selves. And they made a covenant with that woman at that time. And the covenant, they gave her a scarlet cord and told her to place this on her home as a sign of protection. So when you see that scarlet cord, or like a scarlet like wristband or band that people wear on their wrist, especially in Hollywood, you'll see a lot of entertainers, they'll have this scarlet cord, like this red rubber band on their wrist. That is actually a symbol of this. That's Shemitic Israelite culture and custom. So even waving the all red Moorish flag, that is a sign of protection. So when the hellfire comes, when the angel of death comes, or when the Shemitic Israelite army came to sack Jericho and take Canaan, that you would be protected if the red flag or the red color was seen on your home. So think about also during the time of Exodus, when the angel of death was coming through and killing all the firstborn children, and how the people were told to put the blood of the innocent lamb on the door for the Passover. Remember that in the Shemitic culture? So that color of red, all right, the same all red flag that was waving during the Seminole Wars in Florida at Fort Negro. And I think, what was that, 1816 or 1812? So that all red flag that was flying in Fort Negro in Georgia, Florida, by the indigenous tribal Americans, is the same scarlet cord that the harlot Rahab was given by the sons of Zara as they did their spies on Canaan. And that scarlet red cord was given to her to put on her home. So when they came to raise hell and destroy Canaan, and to basically, like I said, unleash havoc and wrath, that they knew, okay, we're going to pass over, Rahab's house because they down with us. They made a covenant with us. But everybody that don't have it, we fucking shit up. So the same way how the Israelite men came through and they was fucking shit up, if you ain't had a red cord, is the same way how the angel of death was fucking shit up. If you ain't had the blood of the lamb on your door, is the same way how the Muskogee and the Creek Red Stick Seminole men in the South was fucking shit up if you wasn't waving the all red indigenous Shemitic flag. All right. So that's what this red line that you see on the screen is coming from. And anytime you see a red line on the coat of arms, they're showing you that they descend from Zara. Okay. So remember, it was Calcol and Zara. These were the sons of Judah. Calcol, he had his own color, which was, I think, may have been gold. And Zara had his own color, which was scarlet red. All right. So you'll have a gold line of Judah and you'll have the scarlet red line of Judah. All right. So these are the lines of Judah. This is why a lot of so-called black men, like to associate themselves with the lion, because that's one of our archetype animals of nobility. Let's move forward. So it says, let's reread this whole part. It says, from that time until now, the emblem of Ulster, or the Shemitic Israelites in the British Isles, has been a red hand circled with a scarlet cord. If you have time, read the book of Joshua, and you will see that Zara's sons gave the harlot Rahab a scarlet thread to place over her home as a sign of protection. This is how I knew that the spies that entered Jericho were the sons of Zara, the scarlet thread. The original Black Scots and Irish are the same people. This can be a bit confusing. I had to look at the data on these two grandsons of Judah for at least 1 week before I realized I was looking at two different migrations of the tribe of Judah to Europe. The Hebrides and the Hebrews are the Hebrews, plain and simple. The so-called scholars know this, and if they don't, they should. So the Hebrides, which basically are in the, like I say, the British Isles, that Atlantic region around England, etc. The Hebrides, Inner and Outer Hebrides, were, created and established and founded by the Hebrews. All right. So we're gonna move forward right now, and I'm about to go into another book called The Negro Question Part 3 rather, dealing with the Black Pentecost. And there's something briefly I want to read in here. So we'll see that the sons of Judah Before the Exodus and during the Exodus, you had different groups of them traveling, throughout Europa in different tribes, but they were all the same people. It was a lot of people. So you had a small group that went in with Scotia and her sons, and they created what we know of as Scotland. And then you had Calcol and some of his sons. So let's look in here and see where some of these other Judean sons went. Because basically, when we talk about the Phrygians or the Trojans, maybe in this book, hold on. All right, here we are right here. Sorry about that. So let's read this and get a little more information. So it says, now I don't have the image right here, but there's an image of King Midas, the Black Jew of Phrygia. All right. This picture is found on a Phrygian coin. This image blown up is that of King Midas of Phrygia or Troy. So when I say Phrygia, I also think of Troy. And on the day of Pentecost, representatives from Phrygia or Troy were present in Jerusalem. In the book of Acts chapter 2, Acts 2, chapter 5 and 10, Luke writes that Jews or Judeans came from every nation under heaven. Ancient Anatolia is modern Turkey, and the people of Troy and Phrygia inhabited this place at the same time. Josephus, the Jewish historian, said that the people of Troy were Jews. Geoffrey of Monmouth stated in his Historiam Britium that the men of Troy/Phrygia settled in Britain. One of the problems that I have with modern scholars is that they dismiss the report of the ancients. The seed of Zara or Dara landed in Ireland with Scotia, and the seed of Calcol landed in the Britain with Brutus. So let's go into this. So it says that Luke writes that the Judeans came from every nation under heaven during the Pentecost. Ancient Anatolia is also Turkey, or Phrygia, or Troy. All right, that's, same region, kind of like Asia Minor. It says ancient Anatolia is modern Turkey, and the people of Troy and Phrygia inhabited this place at the same time. So remember, the ancient Anatolians, the ancient people of Turkey, the ancient Phrygians, although you had certain melanated Japhetic, clans and tribes up there, you also had sons of Judah go in that area as well. All right. So when you think of the Phrygian cap or the Trojan cap, which is that all red hat like the Fez, or even what they call the Santa Claus hat. So you know how Santa Claus wears that little red hat with the little white ball on it? That is the Phrygian or the Shemitic, we'll call Moorish freedom cap. All right. It says Josephus, the Jewish historian, says that the people of Troy were Jews. Geoffrey of Monmouth stated in his Historiam Britium that the men of Troy or Phrygia or ancient Anatolia settled in Britain. So the seed of Calcol came to Britain with Brutus. All right. So keep this in mind. So it says that the seed of Dara landed in Ireland with Scotia, and the seed of Calcol landed in Britain with Brutus. So you got two different Shemitic Israelite tribes and groups of people coming into northern Europa at different times. One group came in with Scotia and her sons. Her husband was Gathelus, and his father had founded Athens, and they also had settled in what we call Iberia or Spain. But after Gathelus died, Scotia and her sons traveled north, and they went into the British Isles, and they created what we call Scotland. Then you had in Britain a group of Shemitic Israelites coming with Brutus, and they were coming from Phrygia or Anatolia or Troy, and they were Shemitic Israelites as well, but we call them Britons. So the Britons and the Scots are actually the same people. They both Shemitic Judeans who came into Northern Europe at different times, but they came from the same ethnic group. That's why their families were intermarried with each other. So the royal families of the British Isles, England, the Celts, the Irish, the Scots, they were intermarried because they all ethnically were of Judean lineage. All right. So understand that, the ancient Judeans left from Phrygia or Troy, and they settled in London, Ireland, and Britain. So the so-called black people in London, Ireland, and Britain have ancestry from ancient Judeans that came from Phrygia and Troy or Anatolia, modern day Turkey, and from the Scottish Moorish people that came from the south that were the descendants of Gathelus and Scotia. All right. So now what we're going to do is get ready to transition into our next topic, because now that we understand who the original nobility was of Europa and how the Judeans, created their kingdoms, we will now see how the Judean kingdoms and the Ishmaelite kingdoms were destroyed in the Levant, the Middle East, and in Europa when the infiltration of the wild man and the wild woman came out of the hellhole known as the so-called Caucasus Mountains, where they were isolated in Asia Minor. Now, before we move forward, understand that the melanated Japhites and some of the various other Afro-Asiatic peoples that were in the Far East, they were of a brown-skinned, melanated complexion as well. And they had slaves and serfs. So we're going to go a little deeper into that in this book, The Negro Question, Part 3, The Black Pentecost. Okay. So we talked about Mundi Calcol and the Judeans that lived in Iberia and Scotland. But now we're going to go into the wild man of Europa. Now I want you to pay attention right here. Right here, what you have is a wild man of Europa. And as you can see, he is of a pale ethnicity. And he has a body full of hair. Okay. And you can see in his hand, he's holding some type of a animal bone. These were the slaves and the serfs once they were captured, cleaned up, shaved, shampooed down, sanitized, trained, given etiquette, skills, and then they would live amongst the nobility and the upper and middle class of Europa. So these melanated Judeans and these other, melanated people who had kingdoms in Europa, they were the upper and middle class citizens. But the lower class citizens were the shaved down, somewhat civilized wild people who used to live in the forest. All right. And this is a picture of them. These pictures go back to like the 1100s, 1200s, 1300s, 1400s. All right. Here's another picture of the wild man. All right. Also known as the Neanderthal. As you can see, body full of hair, living in the forest. Long toenails. Remember I told y'all about they had claws basically on their toenails and long fingernails. But this is actually a real man. Now, in certain literature, they may call him like a satyr or a Sasquatch, the abominable snowman, the Yeti, the Tamahu man. They got a lot of different terms, the hominid man. But nevertheless, this is what that is. When they talk about the children of Yaqub, this is what they're talking about. Here's another picture of the wild family. So this is the wild woman right here. As you can see, body full of hair. So what they would do is they would take these wild women. They would shave them down, shampoo them down. These wild women would then go and some either Hamitic or Shemitic woman would teach her about femininity, teach her, proper feminine womanly etiquette, teach her about the menstrual cycle, and things of that nature. And of course, the wild man, we would shave him down, clean him up, and he would work in the bottom galleys of a boat, or he would work on some plantation or something like that, or he may work in the military. But before that, these people were just living in the woods and the forest, just running around naked, eating anything and doing anything. All right. So there was wild men and women. So when you talk about a lot of those Moorish harems with the Caucasian women, a lot of the initial batch that went in there, they were like this. But after they went in looking like this and got cleaned up and started having children, you know, those children, they necessarily didn't grow up with much body hair and stuff like that because they had more melanated genetics. But a lot of them initially looked like this. Once again, as you can see right here, we have a picture of a melanated indigenous Shemitic, Scottish, Irish, Britain queen or empress. And who do you have her talking to right here? It looks like one of her cleaned up wild men that she caught from the forest, probably is teaching them stuff, and maybe he works for her or something like that, and he's a servant for her. And as you can see right here, she's wearing a crown on her head, so it's showing you that she's the nobility. She's also wearing the Islamic green garb, showing you that she's a Muslim. Okay, so, you know, just showing you that who's the nobility and who's the serf, who's the royalty and who's the slave. Okay, so after, you know, they would catch them from the forest looking like this, clean them up, shampoo them, shave them up, stuff like that, teach him a little English. And now he's looking like this. You see that? But as you can see right here, she's a melanated woman. And she's also instructing him. Look at her face. And look at her hands pointing at something, showing him and telling him what to do because he doesn't know. You know? So we actually taught them. You see? They got their whole culture from us. Here are the wild men in the forest. Once again, you can see body full of hair. I didn't make these pictures up. These pictures were created in the 1200s. And a lot of these people came in during the 100 Years' War, when Edward III created the 100 Years' War and started that with France. So that 100 Years' War and, you know, the bubonic death and the diseases, a lot of this is where they were ushered in. Because when they was fighting the 100 Years' War, both the Moorish Frenchmen and the Moorish Englishmen, the original ones, they both were using pale Caucasian wild men in their armies to fight each other. So you had the Moorish knights, you know, the Knights Templars who were melanated men, but fighting alongside them were these cleaned up, you know, shaved down wild men from the forest. Here's another picture of the wild men of the forest, showing you the hair on the face. Look at all the body hair. This is a woman because you can see the breasts. Look at this man. This is them. This is them. So let's do some reading. Coming out of page 174, the Negro Question Part 3. In 450 AD, there was a brown-skinned man by the name of Attila the Hun who crossed the Volga with his warriors. Attila was so feared by the wild barbarian tribes that a migration of whites flooded into the Roman Empire seeking refuge from Attila. This great migration of whites, or wild people, into the black/mixed Holy Roman Empire has been deliberately taught incorrectly by the so-called educational institutions. When these wild barbarians invaded Rome, the sheer numbers of these invading wild barbarians caused the western leg of the Roman Empire to collapse. When the wild barbarians invaded the Roman Empire, the mulatto peoples were displaced, and according to the eyewitnesses of that generation, this is the point in history where the wild whites populated Europe. So the wild whites started to populate Europe between 450 and 500 AD. They were not there prior to that. Before 450 AD, they were in the Asia Minor, more than likely as the slaves and servants of the brown-skinned melanated Attila the Hun and some of those other Asiatic kingdoms in what we call Asia and Russia. Now let's read some of the names of these wild forest tribe names, okay? Some of them you may have heard of. The Jehusi, the Scythian, the Bactri, Saga, Vandals, Goths, Ostrogoths, Lombards, etc. Okay? Let's listen up. Okay. Now, one of these tribal names were the Bactri. Okay. So you know how we have that term bacteria. The term bacteria comes from the term Bactri. Let's see where that comes from. Now, also, we're going to look and see what the word white really means as well. So although you hear me use the word white, don't think in your mind W-H-I-T-E. Think in your mind W-I-G-H-T. And we will visit in my own book what the true definition of the word white means and why the Moorish nobility called them W-I-G-H-Ts or whites. Okay. So it says, to the top right hand corner of this map. Now, I don't have a picture of the map, but I'm going to just read it. You should see the word Sagna and Bactria. Bactria is where the word bacteria has its origins. These were the white tribes, and their location was on the outskirts of ancient Iran and Iraq. So on the outskirts of ancient Iran and Iraq, what we call Babylon and Persia, in those remote areas, you had these pale, wild tribes out there. Now, also, when we say Caucasian people, we don't want to think just phenotypical Anglo-Saxon type of Caucasian people that we see in North America, like your everyday so-called white person. You need to also think about your pale Bedouin Arabs as well. And you also need to think about your pale Turks as well. You also need to think about your pale, quote unquote, Asians as well. Because all these pale people came from the wild people of the forest and the caves and the caverns, from the steppes and the foothills of Asia Minor. All right. So all these pale people come from these wild forest people. OK, so I don't care what continent they live on. They come from one of these original pale tribes. So although a pale Asian person doesn't look like a pale so-called Arab person, they still come from the same ancestral Neanderthal groups. Although a pale so-called Bedouin Arab person doesn't look like a pale so-called Jewish person or a pale so-called Anglo-Saxon person, but they still all come from those original Neanderthal wild forest groups. You know what I'm saying? They all come from them same groups. All right. So keep in mind that this timeline started at about 450 AD. So now what we're going to do, here's another picture of the wild man. So as you can see right here, now they got these two knights right here. They could have been some wild men that were caught, shaved down, and turned into knights, and now they work for some Moorish army. But other than that, they would have been melanated knights. But you see how they got this wild man right here, and they about to throw him in the fire and burn him up and extinguish him? Because the Moorish armies were sending out knights to find these people and exterminate them. You see? So we was finding them, exterminating them, you know, trying to do an ethnic cleanse on them. The ones that we could try to civilize, we would try to civilize. But nevertheless, you know, we were trying to get rid of these people. And as you can see, they're trying to throw the wild man in the fire and burn him up. You have another wild man right here. And as you can see, he's trying to kidnap this woman. Now, this woman is a pale woman, but she's shaved down. So maybe she was one of the ones that, you know, the Moors took and was trying to clean her up and civilize her. But this wild man trying to take her back into captivity. And as you can see over here, you have, now these would have been melanated Judean kings, although they pale, but don't get caught up in that. But you have the melanated Judean kings over here with their swords and, you know, their military outfits over here to come and ethnic cleanse these wild people of the forest, because these wild people were kidnapping people and causing a lot of problems. OK. And as I said also, too, once these plagues and these deaths started to occur, a lot of the melanated royals would abandon their homes, abandon their communities and cities and castles in Europa. And these wild people would then, you know, take over those areas, take the clothes and start wearing the clothes and stuff like that. And they created their own Christian culture as well. So in Europa, you had a melanated, we'll call Israelite kingdom. And then you had the wild forest Christian kingdom. Now, remember when I talked about those pine trees earlier and how, you know, for the Babylonian Christmas ceremony, they take the pine tree and adorn it with silver and gold like they do during Christmas time. Well, the wild man and woman coming from the forest and the woodlands, they were already used to having like pagan woodland gods and things of that nature. So when the Catholic Church adopted that Babylonian custom, it was very, very easy for them to get with that. So let's read a little deeper. So it says, I was always puzzled by the appearance of these white popes in history, because there were a melanated Judean original people of color that were the popes. So even when I talk about the so-called church, there was a Moorish church, and then you had the pale wild man church. Okay. It says, now, what happened is Rome was invaded by these pale barbarians. And when Rome was invaded, you had a lot of original people being kicked out. Now, let's go deeper right here. It says that the white Lombards, or wild people, the Lombards and the Ostrogoths, invaded Italy. The Moorish Byzantine priests who had been keeping the Sabbath moved residence and set up Byzantine Italy. These are the facts, ladies and gentlemen. The Ostrogoths and Lombards were pale wild barbarians, and they set up shop in Italy after the barbarian invasion. They cannot deny this. Where does the Pope reside? History teaches you that the black popes of Avignon moved their residence from Italy 1309 to 1377 to France. This information is historical and indisputable. So what happened was, once these wild people started to invade, a lot of those Moorish Byzantine priests would move the kingdom, because remember, it was in Eastern Europe at one point, but then they would move down to Italy. So as it said right here, it says, once the Ostrogoths invaded Italy, that the black Byzantine priests who had been keeping the Sabbath moved residence and set up Byzantine Italy. All right. Because remember, they came from the Far East. So they destroyed Eastern Europe first and then traveled more into the West. So once they were destroying Eastern Europe, a lot of the ones that saw that said, look, we about to get out of here. And they traveled west. But unfortunately, they were followed. It says, this may be the point in time when the white popes took the dominion in Italy. Because remember, Italy used to be run by melanated Iberian people. OK, but when the Ostrogoths, the Vandals, and those barbarians infiltrated, it changed the landscape of the place. It says, the earliest date that we can put on the advent or invention of the wild forest popes will have to be 450 AD, and the latest would be 1309 AD. I'm going with 450 AD because generally when people migrate as a whole, they take everything with them, including their priests. So remember, in about 450 to 500 AD is when you first start having Caucasian Christianity set up. OK, this is when that's starting to be set up. And it's the same with a few hundred years later with the Pale Arab and with the so-called Pale Jew as well. All right. So we just wanted to talk about the wild barbarian real quick and get some history on the wild man. We mentioned that. Here's a picture of the wild woman. As you can see, hairy. All right. Had to be shaved down and cleaned up. So now we're going to go into our other book. And we're going to read about the pale wild man of the Levant, or so-called Middle East. Because today, a lot of these so-called practicing Muslims in the Middle East who look like this are actually the descendants of the wild men of the Levant or Asia Minor. So the so-called men that practice Islam today that look like this are just shaved down descendants of the wild man. Let me repeat that. So the so-called men that practice Islam today, call themselves Muslim, and they look like this, are descendants of the wild man of the Levant or Asia Minor, Anatolia. So these men right here, their ancestors look like this. Yes. These men right here, ancestors, look like that. All right. So once again, don't just think about the so-called Caucasian white man. Think about the Arab Turk too. OK. But this is how the original one looked. So the original Shemitic Ishmaelite so-called Arab looks like this. All right. Now, when this man was practicing Islam, it was not a religion. It was a way of life or a culture. Like I tried to explain to the people in the tape I made the other day when we were by the lake. All right. Now, before we move forward, I did say that I wanted to read the definition of the word white so we will understand what that means, because you'll hear me say the white Arab or the white Christian or the white Asian. All right. So we say white and we talk like these are WIGHT people. So this is the definition. This is coming from my own book in chapter 3, Iron Age of Atlantis, on page 40. The word white, or WIGHT, comes from the Old English WIHT, which means, quote, living being, creature, or person, end quote. In Proto-Germanic, it is spelled WIHTI, quote, a thing or demon, end quote. In Dutch, it means, quote, a little child or gnome, end quote. Modern scientists and pop culture classify this same species of being as Neanderthals, hominids, ape men, cavemen, homunculus, abominable snowman, Sasquatch, Anthropithecus troglodytes, Australopithecus, Denisovan hominins, gorillini, orangutans, gibbons, chimpanzees, primeval primates, great apes, pan troglodytes, and more. Archaeologists have dug up skulls that appear to be human-like, but also have cranial features associated with primates. When you look in the mirror, do you see a mankey looking back at you? So what I'm talking about right here is where the word white comes from. It's coming from the Old English or the Old Judean Scottish, WIGHT, meaning living being, creature, or person. So the Moorish Judeans, when we were in Europa, we called them wights, or these creatures. And it also means a thing or a demon or a little child or a gnome. So we were calling them gnomes, little children, demons, things, and creatures. So when you use that word white, WIGHT, it means a creature, a living being, a thing, a demon, a little child, or a gnome. So it doesn't mean like the color white, like a white t-shirt or a white hat or divinity or purity. No, it does not mean that. So WHITE means divinity, purity, divine light, first class citizens, being in the higher self. But WIGHT means a little child, a gnome, a Neanderthal, a creature, a demon, a Sasquatch, a chimpanzee, etc., a troglodyte, a homunculus. So these are the whites that you're looking at right here. Okay, these are whites. WIGHT. Salute to the brother Isaiah. He the one that really put me on that a while ago. These are the descendants of the whites. So these are just WIGHT Bedouin Arabs. So these are white Bedouin Arabs. And they convert into a religion called Islam, and they become practicing Muslims. Because when they were in the caves, they didn't have a culture. So they had to get, taught something organized to teach them how to function as living real people. Because prior to that, they behaved as creatures. So let's move forward. Now, there's a book that I have, and it'll kind of go into just some of the mindsets of the modern day pale Bedouin WIGHT so-called Muslim, and how they don't see the Moorish, Shemitic, Moorish, Israelite people as the people of the book, and they don't see us as the same. So although, you may go to let's say, places of prayer, but just understand when they're looking at you funny and they don't accept you as a brother in faith, that's why. So this is how they look. This is also a picture of original Shemitic or Ishmaelite indigenous people of the so-called Levant or Middle East or East Africa. And as you can see, they are melanated indigenous. They look like so-called black people. So these are the original Muslims and Israelites of the so-called Middle East. And they more than likely were practicing it as a culture. You see how the way this sister is dressed right here? This is culture for her. She's not trying to look like a Muslim. All right. Another Shemitic Ishmaelite man. All right. The original Arabs were people of color. All right. So I got a book. It's called Illuminating the Darkness, Blacks and North Africans in Islam by Habib Akande. Illuminating the Darkness, Blacks and North Africans in Islam by Habib Akande. And I got this at a Islamic store one day. And, you know, it had a good record of a lot of the racism and, you know, how they see the melanated original Moorish peoples, believe it or not. So let's just kind of, you know, bounce around and see what we can find. Okay. So it says the racialized discourse prevalent in modern times was alien to pre-Islamic Arabs and early Muslims. Black Africans were not considered to be genetically different to black Arabs. Let me repeat that. Black Africans were not considered to be genetically different to black Arabs. So when I say a black African, I'm talking about a Moorish or a melanated Hamite. If I say a black Arab, I'm talking about a Moorish or a melanated Shemitic person. All right. So remember, indigenous people can be Shemites, Japhites, Hamites. All right. So keep that in mind. But just starting off, it says that the melanated Arabs and the melanated Africans ultimately were the same people. All right. It says that a report from al-Bukhari indicates this. When a fair-skinned Arab Bedouin's wife bore a black child, he suspected that she might have been guilty of infidelity. So he went to the messenger of Allah to seek his counsel. The prophet informed the Bedouin that his child probably inherited his dark complexion from one of his forefathers. The Bedouin did not object to the rationale, as it was common to have, quote, black Arabs or Shemitic Ishmaelite Arabs. The majority of pure Arabs are said to have been brown in complexion, though there are many Arabs with varying skin tones ranging from very fair to very dark. So what happened was when these wild people came into the Levant, into these Islamic kingdoms, there were already dark-skinned, brown-skinned, melanated people there that looked like this, and looked like this, and looked like this, and looked like this. But when they got there, you know, of course, certain intermixing and things of that nature happened because a lot of our people, the same way that you see right here, the same way right here, you see the Moorish Judeans of Christendom trying to exterminate, you know, and get rid of these wild people, is the same way that the Moorish Ishmaelites did too when they came into the Levant. So a lot of the harems and stuff like that, you know, they would shave down those women and put them in the harems. And a lot of these Arabs, believe it or not, these pale ones, they sprung forth from those unions. All right. So just keep that in mind. Let's move forward. It says that when the Arabs of the past used the word aswad or black to describe a person, they usually meant that the person's complexion was actually very dark. Aswad was usually descriptively rather than in an ethnic sense. The Arabs would say aswad to describe any person of a dark complexion. Pure-blooded Arabs described themselves as black, while non-Arabs were described as red. So I just want you to see that, you know, that the original Muslims, they were full-blooded people that look like us. So when you see people in North America today that are so-called black, and when they come back into their understanding of their higher self, and they're inclined to lean toward Islam, that's not off. You know what I'm saying? Because just a few hundred years ago, a lot of their ancestors were practicing an Islamic, you know, way of life. And I don't mean a religion, I mean a culture. So then moving on, it says that now let's talk about Adam real quick. It says, quote, when the term Adam is used to describe an individual's complexion, it means very dark skin. It is said that the term comes from the expression, the face or surface of the earth, which means the color of the earth. From this word, Adam, the father of mankind, received his name. The prophet Adam was also said to have received the name Adam due to his dark skin complexion. So even in Islam, the Moorish scholars wrote the history, the true history, to teach people that the original indigenous people were of a dark complexion. So think about how Adam is described as being of a complexion of the earth, one of the various earth tones. So he was an indigenous man. He sprung forth from the soil. Okay. Now, let me say this too. Now, remember how I said that when the wild people, that look like this, when they came into Europa and they started to create their own Christian culture, well, the wild people of the Levant or so-called Middle East came in and they created their own so-called Islamic culture, just like they created their own so-called Jewish culture. All right. So there's a difference between the Moslem empire of Moorish people and the Islamic Muslim empire of the Bedouin Pale Arab people. All right. It's a difference. It's a difference. Both of them may wear some of the same attires, but it's different. For example, like me, this headdress that he's wearing right here is, this is one of my favorite Moorish garbs to wear. So you may see me wearing something like that, but I come from a different house than he comes from. You see? So we may be dressing the same, but it's different, if that makes sense. All right. So when they talk about the Prophet Muhammad, there's a melanated Moorish Prophet Muhammad, and then you have a pale Bedouin Prophet Muhammad. The pale Bedouin Prophet Muhammad was for the wild man, and he came from their group. And the melanated Prophet Muhammad more than likely was an Ishmaelite man of Shemitic descent. And he is the one who introduced the real Quran and tried to bring back the real Hebraic culture in an Islamic fashion. Right? Let's keep going. The color of the mud from which Adam was created. The Quran mentions that Adam was created from, quote, sounding clay of altered black smooth mud, end quote. There are varying opinions amongst Muslim scholars regarding Adam's residence on earth. Some say India, while others say somewhere in sub-Saharan Africa. Recent studies by leading anthropologist Sheikh Anta Diop have shown that the first inhabitants of earth were black and from East Africa. Linguists and lexicographers are also in some disagreement with regards to the origin of Adam's name, peace be upon him. Arabic lexicographers, state that the word Adam is not of Arabic origin, and others say that the word Adam is derived from the word Adamah, meaning earth. Ibn Manzur says, quote, there is some disagreement concerning the origin of the name Adam. Some people say that he was named Adam because he was created from the skin or Adamah of the earth. Others say that he was named Adam because of the tawny complexion that Allah created him in, end quote. So either way it goes, you're not going to be able to get around that Adam looked like this. Okay, he looked something like that. Adam was of a dark complexion, of a brown complexion. They'll even use that word tawny to describe Moorish peoples, all right, or indigenous peoples. So Adam was a melanated man, a ruddy man, that had one of the various earth tones. And when we say Adam, we're not talking about just one man either. We're talking about the indigenous original men and women of the planet that God Most High first put here on this planet. All right. Those original people were people of brown and dark skin tones. All right. Natural earth skin tones. All right. Let's see where we at now. Okay. Now, also, let me say this too real quick. Now, we all know in history that there was so-called Islamic slave trade. All right. And as I told you, initially, the first Islamic slave trade were when the Muslims that looked like this enslaved the wild people that looked like this. Okay. So the first Islamic slave trade is when the Moorish Ishmaelites and Israelites who were practicing Islam would go through the Levant, go through Anatolia, go through Northwest Africa, go through the Mediterranean. And when they would have their war campaigns, a lot of these wild people that they caught They would force these Caucasian men, they would shave them down, and they would make them convert into Islam by being a Muslim, practicing the religion. And they would name them something like a Mameluke, all right? They would name them a Mameluke or a Janissary, all right? So in the Christian world, they would be shaved down and made into knights. In the Islamic world, the Moorish men would shave them down and turn them into Mamelukes. If you want to get more history on this, go watch the movie Dracula that came out in, 2016? What was it, Dracula Untold? But that's what that movie is about. Now, although in the movie they're going to show the Moorish Christendom kingdom being pale, and they're going to show you the Islamic kingdom as pale. But in real life, both of them were melanated, okay? So you did have a lot of, melanated Ishmaelite men who were very, very aggressive and abusive. I'm not saying that it was cool. And they did force a lot of people into Islam. And a lot of these wild men from the forest and from Asia Minor, they would capture the men, shave them down, force them into Islam, make them as janissaries and send them out to fight. And a lot of the wild women, they would shave them down and put them in the harems. So a lot of these modern day, quote unquote, Bedouin pale Arab people, they come from the union of Moorish men that look like this, shaving down and cleaning up pale women that look like this. All right. And that's where men that look like this came from, whether they know that or not. Because as you can look at them, they're all what they call mulatto, or men who have racially or ethnically ambiguous features. So you don't know if these men are they of Latin descent? Are they of Spanish descent? Are they just so-called mixed between a black and a white person? Like, you really can't tell. These men could have told you that they were from Colombia, and you could agree with it, especially if they didn't talk. If they were speaking Spanish, you could have thought they were from some Spanish world or some Spanish country. So the reason why the people in, so-called Spain, some of them Arab countries, the reason why they look racially ambiguous, because these Christian and Islamic Moorish kings, they practice this harems. So that's where that mixture came from, and that racially ambiguous look that you see them have. All right. But originally,